I'm interested in one thing and one thing only, and that's bent coppers.
All right. Because of this fungus of authoritarianism, this fungus of self-righteousness, our lawmen no longer believe in enforcing the law fairly. Donald Trump, your former president, has been indicted again. This is an historic federal indictment of the former president by the Department of Justice. Not only a former president, but the leading candidate in the next election against the sitting president, who, of course, runs the executive division, which includes the Department of Justice. So it's suspicious from the get-go. It's not the kind of thing you should do lightly. According to sources talking to ABC News, the charges against Trump include willfully retaining the national defense documents. Remember, he had it in Mar-a-Lago, obviously, conspiring to obstruct justice, withholding the documents, corruptly concealing the records, concealing a document in a federal investigation, scheming to conceal and making false statements who could carry a maximum of 75 years in prison. Here's Trump's response, cut 18.
Very sadly, we're a nation in decline, and yet they go after a popular president, a president that got more votes than any sitting president in the history of our country, by far, and did much better the second time in the election than the first. And they go after him on a boxes hoax, just like the Russia hoax and all of the others. It's just been going on for 7 years. They can't stop because it's election interference at the highest level. There's never been anything like what's happened. I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent person. They had the Mueller hoax, the Mueller report, and that came out. No collusion after 2.5 years. That was set up by Hillary Clinton and Democrats. But this is what they do. This is what they do so well.
You know, even if you hate Trump, even if you think Trump is the worst thing ever, even if you'd like to see him pull out of the upcoming election, it's hard to argue with him about this. It is hard to say, because it's not, let's say he broke the law. It's not that they're prosecuting him for apparently breaking the law. It's the people they're not prosecuting, including Joe Biden, who also had classified documents and mishandled classified documents. But more importantly, Hillary Clinton, who not only had thousands of classified documents going through her phone illegally, but bleached her phone, electronically bleached her phone so that they couldn't trace them. And you remember what then FBI head James Comey said about that. Here's cut 17.
When I look at the facts we gathered here, as I said, I see evidence of great carelessness, but I do not see evidence that is sufficient to establish that Secretary Clinton or those with whom she was corresponding both talked about classified information on email and knew when they did it, they were doing something that was against the law. Right? So given that assessment of the facts, my understanding of the law, my conclusion was and remains, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. No reasonable prosecutor would bring the second case in 100 years focused on gross negligence.
Bent coppers. I've seen enough bent coppers.
You know, if I see a bent copper, I'll go after him.
That montage was from a terrific British show called Line of Duty. And the guy speaking is a character called Ted Hastings, played by a wonderful character actor named Adrian Dunbar. And Hastings is an honest man who leads a division trying to ferret out bent coppers like James Comey. And the reason he's so honest, he won't even cheat on his wife after his wife has left him. And the reason it is always implied throughout the show is because he's a Catholic, because he has faith, which tells them, the Christian faith, that no man is righteous. Therefore, nobody can be trusted with power. And therefore, the police have to be overseen and hunted down. Of course, the other cops hate him because they think he's a rat. But no, he just understands that people are corrupt. Anybody with power is going to be corrupted by that power, and they have to be watched. That has totally gone by the board because the left believes it's so righteous that the law no longer matters. That is what they believe. They believe that they themselves are righteous and their philosophy is righteous, and they know in their hearts that's not true, but because they have to maintain that facade, that delusion, they have to silence everybody else and attack everybody else. If the Supreme Court overturns their whims, then it's illegitimate. The fact that Hillary Clinton was not indicted for crimes far worse than anything Trump could have done reveals who they are. I'm not speculating that the DOJ is dirty. I can prove that the DOJ was dirty. Before the indictment came out, the New York Times was running an article saying, we have sources telling us that Trump's about to be indicted. And Trump was saying, I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing it. So the sources weren't in the Trump clan. They weren't in the Trump area. They were coming from the federal government. They were coming from the Department of Justice. So the Department of Justice is talking to the New York Times, is telling the New York Times that Trump is going to be indicted. But when the House Oversight Committee asks the FBI to turn over a document, an unclassified document that includes an accusation that Joe Biden, when he was vice president, was bribed with $5 million, the FBI says no. Christopher Wray actually said, oh, this document doesn't exist. The first thing they said was, no, this document doesn't exist. The document accuses Joe Biden of taking a bribe of $5 million while he is vice president, but the document just doesn't exist. So Comer, James Comer, the head of the House Oversight Committee, subpoenas the document. Christopher Wray says, I'm not going to turn it over. Comer then says, well, we're going to hold you in contempt. And finally, he breaks down, the FBI breaks down, and they allow the House to go in and take a look at this document, which of course does exist. Now think about that for a minute. Somebody in the DOJ is calling the New York Times and telling him Trump is going to be indicted, but nobody will go to the House Oversight Committee and show them a document in response to a legal subpoena. They won't show. So we know these guys are dirty. It's not like they might be dirty. We know they're dirty. We don't know what Trump did. We don't know whether he violated the law or what he did, if it really falls under the law. I know if just an ordinary soldier did what he did, he'd be arrested. But when Clinton wasn't arrested and when he is indicted, we know they're dirty because of the way they're dealing with information. So now the House goes in and it looks at this document. And Jamie Raskin, the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, the Democrat, the key Democrat, comes out and he says, well, you know, the former Attorney General William Barr investigated these accusations and he dismissed the charge. And Barr says, no, that's not what happened. It was the exact opposite. The document was sent on for further investigation. So now Comer comes on and he goes on Just the News. And this is what he says about the document he saw.
Yes, it is Ukraine. This Form 1023 involves a business person from Ukraine who allegedly sent a bribe, substantial bribe, to then Vice President Joe Biden.
Sources I believe this is the New York Post has the sources, saying that a Barisma executive, you all remember Barisma, the oil company, the energy company, that Hunter Biden had this massively well-paying sinecure, I think it was $50,000 a month, for sitting on their board when he had no expertise in this field whatsoever. So a Barisma executive wanted to get involved in the American oil business, but he needed help because, this is what the document says, apparently, he needed help because Barisma corruption was under investigation by a prosecutor named Victor Shokin. And what he wanted to do was pay Joe Biden $5 million and possibly Hunter Biden another $5 million to get rid of this guy, Victor Shokin, right? So that they wouldn't expose the corruption in Barisma, and Barisma could then go on and make more money in the American oil industry. Now, not saying Joe Biden is guilty, because who would ever suspect Joe Biden of being part of a family of influence peddlers illegally using their offices for gain? That would be a shocking thing to just come out and say right here where everyone knows it's true. Vice President Biden bragged that he went to Ukraine, talked to the then president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. There was $1 billion he was supposed to offer of U.S. aid, and he told Poroshenko that he was not going to give him that $1 billion in U.S. aid. This is, according to Joe Biden, what happened. Cut 19.
They were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
So the story then would be that he took a $5 million bribe to stop an investigation into Barisma, where his son was getting $50,000 a month to do nothing except get him, obviously make contact to Joe Biden. He then used U.S. aid, our foreign aid, which is supposed to be there for the benefit of our country and those countries we choose to help, to blackmail the president of Ukraine into getting rid of this DA. Now, no prosecutor, no reasonable prosecutor working for this DOJ would ever prosecute that, but that's a pretty interesting story that holds together pretty well. And this is just a DOJ of bent coppers. James Comey, I believe, by the way, I believe these guys think they're patriots because they think that they're the righteous people and Trump represents an existential threat to our democracy. It doesn't occur to them that the only way they can do right is by following the law, enforcing the law equally to all people. No, they're bent. Their sense of righteousness has bent them. This is because they're in the grip of this fungus that is eating away at their brains, telling them they're the righteous ones. They're the ones, not all the 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump. They're not the righteous ones. The people at the FBI, the DOJ are the righteous ones, and therefore have the right to supersede the system that's in place, the laws that are in place, to falsely and unfairly prosecute them. And again, this has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with how you or I feel about Donald Trump or how the left feels about Donald Trump. But this is something that everybody should see is just unfair. In the grip of this fungus, they cannot tell the difference between the delusion of righteousness in their head and the reality of the world. And that is the definition of madness. For more Klavan-y goodness, like and subscribe, and also subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.